All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. This is Jason Ryan, Chair of the Task Force. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to pretty quickly turn it over to our presenter, Chris. But before I do that, I'll just remind folks that please mute if you're not talking. We can use the chat function or raise your hand if you want to ask a question. And so, Chris, as you're presenting, maybe keep an eye on up on that. I will also do my best to try to moderate the discussion. If I see people have questions, I may interrupt you to go ahead and get those questions asked at the time that they're asked, or the time that the folks want to ask them. I do encourage all of the task force members to ask questions so you fully understand this, so we can have a discussion after today's presentation about what we want to do with the information that we learned, as usual. And as typical, this is being recorded so that it can be posted on our YouTube channel, so that others who couldn't join us live today can go back and watch and learn as well. So with that, Chris, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it. And as Jason said, please, if I don't see the hand on the screen or whatever, please just interrupt if you have a question. For everyone that was at GCPA yesterday, a lot of the same content. It'll be a little bit different based on some of the feedback we received from yesterday, giving a little bit more information, and we'll be providing a little bit more information about the registry itself today. So with that, I'm going to jump in. Thanks very much for having us today. We really appreciate it. We want to just quickly go through who we are and why we exist, talk a little bit about data sharing and DER's use, a gap that we identified as we were working around the world over the last 3 years, and then just basically give you an overview of the nonprofit DER registry and what we're doing to roll that out for the industry's consideration and use. So some of the feedback and some of the comments that we received yesterday were pretty interesting, and so a good friend asked us to maybe cover a little bit about the idea of data sharing and what it means to people based on where their particular view of the world sits. And so our CTO, Richard Beeson, was with OSI Soft for 32 years and was the developer of the PI system. And he came up with the best example for this, walking into a power plant, walking down the line. They talk to the person that is running the steam plant. And the manager says, well, let's go talk to Kim because she's the one that does valves. And then let's go talk to Jerry because he's the one that does pumps. And they talked about putting in the PI system and putting in data and data monitors and different things. And each of the employees are like, we've been doing this for 20 years. We don't need your help. And we definitely don't need anybody looking over our shoulder. And we definitely don't need anybody giving us feedback. Okay. But the manager clearly knows that sharing data is a good thing. And then the manager gets pulled up to a group of managers, and the people running the coal crushers and the people running the electric yard are like, yeah, but we should all share this data with each other for everything that's going on at the plant. And then each one of the managers goes parochial and says, well, wait, this is my stuff. I don't need you looking over my shoulder. I don't need you, helping me because I know what I'm doing in my area. And this progresses, whether you're part of a power plant, whether you're part of a group of power plants. But the idea is basically going through a process that says, is it a good thing to share data? Is it a bad thing to share data? And how are we going to be looking at this as we think about it from our perspective? So where you are in the management chain of the overall plant, the overall industry, it all affects how you view things. And the thought process of how we share data and why we share data um, needs to be viewed from the construct of how are we going to make our grid reliable. And so we would just ask that people think a little bit today as they go through this presentation and hear this presentation. Think a little bit about we're all in this together. We're on one synchronous grid in Texas. It is all interconnected, regardless of political or policy boundaries or ideas or how we have chosen to break things up. We're all in this together, and the reliability swings with our ability to work together to make sure that all of these things happen. We do know that data sharing produces results. We also know that there's different ways to do data sharing, but if you can boil up the conversation and put more eyes on it, things tend to improve significantly. And we have seen this around the world. But the other things that we have seen around the world in Australia, Germany, Ireland, and different places is that the political structures and policy tend to make us forget about the physics of our grid. And we start thinking in terms of market constructs or policies and kind of forget that the physics of this, Kirchhoff and Ohm don't really care what rules we write. They're going to run the system the way that physics tells them to run the system. And so the thought process of what rolling through this and what we've seen around the world has clearly indicated and shown in our view, and this is why we have spent so much time here in Texas, that ERCOT is kind of next in this evolution. It's in exactly the right geography. It's got a lot of sun, a lot of wind. It's got all of the right drivers with recent significant outages and price spikes, creating uncertainty. And so the structure and the thought process of how the evolution occurred in Australia and Germany and Ireland, those same factors exist now for ERCOT. And it is the piece that drives our interest in saying perhaps the best place that we could help is here in Texas. And that is why we have spent so much time here. So again, we would just ask that you maybe pull back from where you exist in the world specifically as you and think a little bit about the overall reliability of a connected grid. I know we've been introduced to many of you, but our purpose in forming these companies was to empower this energy transition. We are going to have some mix of central station and distributed resources. And with all the work that we've done around the world, we've seen a lot of the ways that we believe that you just can't do it. And so we wanted to create a support mechanism to help the industry engage with distributed energy resources in a positive way to empower this energy transition and hopefully eliminate some of the administrative burden in the process. So we had to create two companies. We thought we were just going to create the nonprofit, but when you get into the legal aspects of what a nonprofit can do, if we have collaborative utility solutions providing the registry and one specific utility has a request that nobody else, thinks is necessary, but they still want that done, collaborative utility solutions could not help them. And so we needed to set up a structure where we could provide that capability to make sure that we could move this forward. And overall, as we have worked with everyone, we get very different impressions about what a DER even is. Is a DER, is it not a DER if it's not distribution connected? Can we call transmission connected small scale solar plants of 10 megawatts DERs, or are they not? Because FERC defined them no. So there's all these kinds of different conversations that go on, and the use cases are inconsistent. Standards adoptions are moving slowly, and everybody has a different view of how quickly this is going to matter for them. And so this creates kind of an inconsistent thought process about how and how fast we need to deal with things. And so it creates a whole different set of fundamental issues with everybody having the conversation. And within that framework, we've really found one specific gap. We know that the industry has been broken up into silos and then deregulated, and then some are markets, some are not. But the one gap that we were surprised to find was there was just no collaboration out there that provides tools in a nonprofit basis for our industry. There are a lot of people writing wonderful reports and doing wonderful studies from DOE to ESIG to EPRI, even our standards groups with NASB and IEC and NIST and a host of others, but nobody's showing up with a nonprofit tool. And with that gap identified in conversations with all those groups, we said we are going to move forward and provide this nonprofit tool because we believed it needed to be nonprofit for the benefit of the industry. And beyond a shadow of a doubt, in all the work that we've done in all of the jurisdictions, the need for this sharing of data with the DERs is very clear. And they're all going backwards now and starting over to build these registries to make this happen. So, to enable DERs through a collaborative mechanism, there's several things that need to occur. But the first set is really thinking about what is the necessary data set. Where is the DER, both electrically and geographically? What is it? Is it solar, battery, an EV, a wind generator? Do you have multiple of those behind the same meter? What is it? And what can it do? What is its capability to talk to us? How can we dispatch it? Can it absorb energy? Can it reject energy? What are we doing? And ultimately, who owns it to make sure that the conversation can be had with them about whether or not it can be used in a market scenario. So we built this information model. It's, kind of analogous to creating a language to share this information in a way that the industry can share it together in a collaborative fashion. Obviously, security is paramount. I won't spend a lot of time here, but our CTO is Richard Beeson, who was the developer and owner of OSI Soft Pi for 32 years. And it's the only system in the power industry that's never been pointed to as a direct security threat vector that anybody ever exposed. And it manages the most secure data in our life cycle as an industry with all the operational control of our major grid appliances. And so he has built that same security into this structure and this process for our registry. And we are happy to make him available if anybody wants to talk deeper about security. So, as we walked through the process, we had to have the conversation about what's in the registry and why. And as you get into the conversation, exactly as we started, are we talking to the person in charge of the valves? Are we talking about the person in charge of the pumps? Are we talking about their manager? Are we talking to aggregators, regulators, ISOs, utilities, or end use customers? And everybody has a different view of how much data I need and why I need that data. And so we needed to look across all the market segments and structures and look at all those pieces and say, on a physics based basis, not policy based, but physics based, what data would need to be shared to make sure that we can allow the reliability organizations in the industry the ability to effectively coordinate and plan together as priority job one. The second thing that we looked at is, okay, great. If we've got reliability and planning coordination done, how can we smooth or ease the transaction side of this to make it easier for customers to interact with their utility, an aggregator, or a market to be able to allow the use of that DER in a utility based program, in an ISO RTO based program? Overall, how do we help that happen? So we boiled the ocean with all of those things and started with the reliability side and said, great, today all the distribution utilities are pushing up net load to the ISO. At a substation, it may be pushed up as net load as 100 megawatts, but there's really 130 megawatts of load there. It's just being offset with 30 megawatts of solar. So on a day like yesterday in Texas, there's no sun. And so that load might be 130 megawatts without any support from the solar side of the equation. And this is causing significant issues, especially in places like Australia, when now 55% of their total energy for their entire country is coming from rooftop solar. So, this thought process of being able to plan and coordinate effectively means that the reliability coordinators must share the appropriate data so they actually know that there's 130 megawatts of load there and they have 30 megawatts of other. Maybe it's 10 of DG, 10 of batteries, and 10 of solar. And that is all important to know because they all act and react differently in terms of being able to support and manage the grid. And, in one of our conversations, it just became apparent to us is like we would never allow a 3,000 megawatt nuclear power plant to connect to our power system without a full integration study and everything else that went into that. We wouldn't allow it to come on with a custom interface. It would have to follow our industry standard EMS protocols through SIM. But at the same time, for a variety of other reasons, we've got about 3,500 megawatts of these registered and unregistered DERs in Texas. So without that integrated planning thought process, without all of those pieces, and depending on whose projection you looked at, you got another, nuclear power plant coming in the next 24 months. And the bottom line is, ERCOT and distribution utilities, the reliability coordinators, they simply can't do their job unless we choose to share information effectively to be able to plan and operate and manage our grid in a reliable fashion. And to do that, we have to translate data between different organizations and we have to basically understand where that DER is. And there's two primary inflection points for data within the electrical sim world of things. The first one is at the meter. It separates consumer from the distribution company. And the second one is at the substation transformer at the transmission point of interconnection, where we go from low voltage to high voltage. And that interface point separates the distribution company from the TSO, ISO, RTO constructs and the information required to place it either at from the meter to the substation or the substation to the market location. So with those kinds of interfaces in mind, we knew that we had to build the registry utilizing SIM. And for anybody that doesn't know SIM, um, you don't want to have to learn sim. It's a pretty robust thing, which means that it's got a 200-page primer, and there's a lot of it's a canonical representation, so a one-to-one canonical model with relationships of every single object that exists in a power industry. So there's over 1,000 objects in it, and it basically was put together to be and the best example that we've gotten so far is the UN. Um, every country couldn't bring 157 or 257 or 357 translators to the meeting at the UN to be able to talk to everybody that was there. Instead, they developed lingua franca, which is a one-to-one canonical translator saying, you only have to bring an English translator because sitting in the middle, like Sim sits in the middle here, you translate to English and they will have their English translator that can translate back to their language. And now we have a common framework about how we do this. And what's important to recognize in this picture as well, and it came up yesterday, was that the actual data location doesn't matter to the registry. If there is a system already with a utility and they have data at their location, the registry, as long as we have a SIM compliant data transaction, can reference that data automatically without it moving to the registry. It can stay housed, managed by that member utility for their system, their structure within their location. We're not basically saying that we don't want to replace systems. We don't want to take over systems. This is the data sharing tool to make sure that the appropriate data is available to the market players as they need it. And so that thought process about having the SIM, having that translation methodology, and also recognizing that that gives us immense flexibility for utilities that may already have electronic tools versus the vast majority that we have talked to that do not have the electronic tools to be able to do this themselves today. So there's a big history of SIM, but it's important because it started with EPRI saying, look, it doesn't matter, it shouldn't matter if it's an ABB or Siemens or GE or whoever turbine. We can't keep having a custom interface to them because we can't operate the grid if everybody's speaking a different language. We need to have this SIM model. And so 25, 30 years ago, they spent a decade figuring this out, and the SIM model has grown from 100 objects on the generation side to over 1,000 objects, covering our CIS systems, our GIS systems, distribution, transmission, generation, customer, and creating even market-based SIMs for all the market-based information for us to be able to translate that effectively. And it is huge, over 1,000 classes and objects, but it is our industry's version of plug and play, and it's why we built the registry on that functional structure. A registry does solve many problems, and this is a small representation, but the big piece here is that we can't go about this as business as usual and everybody think that I'm special, I'm unique. DERs and DER integration are the same from a physics basis for everyone. And the thought process of how of incorporating them, managing them reliably, we will go through a decade of significant problems and administrative nightmares if we don't have a way to share this information effectively with the reliability coordinators and market participants. And that was our goal, to be able to wipe out that decade of kind of problematic structure, to be able to do this in a way that supports everyone in this space. And we always know that nothing is perfect at the outshoot. We've spent 3 years and talked to hundreds of people and went through the process. But as we move through these processes and beta test, we know that the registry is going to change significantly in the first 12 and 24 months, because no battle plan survives first contact. And so we know that we'll be making lots of changes, but the changes that we make are based on our members. They're in full control of the evolution and the product stack. As a nonprofit 501c6, they get to structure what is next for the registry and what changes need to be made. And within our industry, collaboration is not always possible. But this is an instance where we can all collaborate if we choose to. It has multi-billion-dollar implications. There's been a couple studies released talking about 20 to 40 billion dollars in the US just for creating the registries. Forget about all the other pieces that come with that. And we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that in a nonprofit basis, this can all go in for less than 100 million, with the structure that we have in the nonprofit. And specific to Texas, um, using that same methodology from the previous side, we think that we can save Texas $130 million from the 130 plus utilities doing their own thing. And from an ongoing basis, change orders, what data needs to come in, what data needs to come out, paying maintenance fees. Look, we don't have any of that. We have a membership fee, and the membership fee for every single person in ERCOT, every utility, every aggregator, everybody that we could think of, was less than 3 million. And so the process of being able to deliver this registry for our all players is a dramatic, both upfront as well as annual savings, for the state. The structure of our company and the way that we put it together was very much about how our industry operates. We wanted to initially start with the registry. We've already been asked about other things, but starting with the registry, looking at the structure of utility members, having an EPRI-S type based on size, number of consumer meters, have a block rate structure that over time each year our board looks at what our necessary budget is. And the more members that are added, the price goes down, obviously, because we're not, while our costs will go up with the number of members, it won't be commensurate with a linear thought process of the number of members. It's scale efficient, so costs will continue to go down over time. We did get a lot of questions about the free membership of commissions, ISOs, and equipment suppliers. And basically, these are the folks we need the drop down list to make it easier for customers to select their equipment versus having to manually enter them. Obviously, if we were to charge commissions or ISOs, the structure of our industry says that that charge will flow back to the utilities. So effectively, we would be double billing the utilities. So, with recognition of how our industry works, we said that ISOs, equipment suppliers, and commissions would get access to the tools in the system at no cost. And then the competitive suppliers for DER aggregation or competitive choice would pay based on their size. How many DERs do you have registered in the system? And then a token registration fee for the actual asset to come in, as much to track it and manage it as anything else. So the words on this page are just everything I just said for that picture. We do have a desired board structure to try to create a cross-functional representation for the different silos of our industry. Um, so this membership is based on just our time in industry and the folks that represent the segments and the sectors of our industry. This can change over time based on member recommendations, saying we really think XYZ organization should be part of the board structure to help provide guidance and support. We have the ability in our bylaws to change that based on member participation. So at the end of this, I want to shift a little bit now and talk about the actual registry and how we get to a complete DER data record. When you start this process, obviously the owner, you need to think about this a little bit from if we were to say the system was in place today and everybody is using it, the owner's going to come into the system, they're going to put in their personal information, and we're going to get address and meter ID and name, and then we're going to validate that through a SIM tie to the DSO and say, is this a real customer? Is this their real name? Is this their real service address? Is this their real meter ID? And if it is, we allow them into the registry and say, okay, you can now put in all the stuff about your DER. And the customer may say, well, that's great, but my installer is going to do that for me. Or I have already engaged an aggregator and they're going to do that for me. So the registry allows the owner to put the information in or their authorized agent. Once that information is in, we now have the personal information, who it is, we have what it is, and now we need to know where it is, specifically electrically. And there are two additional data fields. So with the DSO, we find out meter to transmission point of interconnection substation transformer. And then we also do a check with, is this customer critical care, critical load? And we do a check about which substation are they on for load shed schemes. And we add that to the record because in different markets, there are different rules about what products you can participate in based on what level of the load shed scheme for UFLS, UVLS that may be in place inside of a utility. Then we check with the TSO, ISO, RTO on its transmission position, point of service, market subnode, node, and make sure that the record is now complete with that. And then the aggregator will be responsible for the smart information. What's its withdrawal capability? What's its injection capability? What are you bidding in from that site? What are you, how are you aggregating this site into your aggregation, and being able to do all that coordination and registration piece. Um, so, sorry, I just saw a note flash up, but I didn't get a chance to read it. Does somebody have a question?
I wanted to drop that in for you, Chris. We can talk about it more later. I need to run to an executive call, but this is Arushia Tesla, the vice chair of the task force.
Uh-huh.
Answer it offline. We can talk later. I wanted to throw
Okay,
it in for the rest of my team on the task force to think about.
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. All right. So, and then in each market structure, there will be an approval process. So once you have a data record, there will be a process in each jurisdiction, whether it's a vertically integrated utility program or whether it is a market-based program that says we need to get this approved. They will have different names, they will have different structures in each different place, but the great thing about SIM is they have the construct of saying this thing is called this by this person, this by this person, and so we have the ability to map that and make that effective in the registry, regardless of what the naming conventions are. But we have to recognize that there is a process for approval. That process is ingrained in the registry in the sense that we have started at the bottom with the customer approving the aggregator that will represent them, the aggregator working with a competitive retail supplier, in the ERCOT case, a rep, the rep being able to work with the DSO, where the DSO gets the opportunity to approve or reject both on a site basis as well as on an aggregation basis. And once you move beyond the DSO and up to the TSO ISO, the people that we have worked with prior to ERCOT have said that everybody above a DSO is only going to have the opportunity to approve or reject the entire aggregation, not a specific site. Obviously, that's up to the regulatory authority, the market structure, and it can be dynamically changed, but this is just representing that regardless, it's a role-based approval process and it moves through the chain accordingly. This can be done in a shared fashion with forms if there are existing forms, done in a parallel way with those forms, filling those forms out, being able to move them through. This screen capture is just an example of data access. The thought process that for each field, each row of this Excel sheet, that data field is entered by someone, and the regulatory authority for all of the market players in their market structure will make a determination of who can have access to that data field specifically. So the structure of our registry allows a dynamic framework that allows each regulatory authority to have complete control over who has data access for the records for the registry. And the next aspect of this is that we use this structure to actually map to uh, different markets. So the registry and all of its information and how we're doing data validation, there's a tremendous amount of information there. And then on the right, we have mapped to the ERCOT data aggregation spreadsheet to basically say what's the gap. The E's would represent this is an extra field that's not currently in the ERCOT spreadsheet. The N is there's no gap between the two. We have a matched field that we've mapped. And then there is, if there's a Y, that means that there's a field that ERCOT is requesting that wasn't currently in the registry. The specific one on the screen here is that ERCOT has a drop-down list that says, is it a PV, a parallel generator, synchronous generator, a water heater? We we kind of have that as self-evident because we're filling in those in the registry, but not a problem to add that field within the registry. So that would just be a gap, and we would just need to talk with the task force and ERCOT and say, okay, is this necessary, or is this the rest of the information adequate? And then we add that field in. So to kind of bring this to a close and be able to answer some questions. I know I've been going very fast, but if anybody doesn't know who Scott Charney is, he's one of the preeminent cybersecurity experts in the world, has worked for DOJ, presidents, now works for Microsoft as their head of cybersecurity. And he provided a bunch of testimony to Congress on, the importance of information sharing. But the reality of information sharing is the group that is doing it needs to trust each other, that we have some bigger purpose that is supported, and it outweighs any potential risk because we know that there are significant benefits. So I just put this in here to say, what are we not here for? um, we're not here to try to convince you about the value of data sharing or the need for a reliable grid or any of those things. That's a decision that you all have to make, and it's not for us to try to convince you of, kind of facts in the world of how data sharing works or anything else. We're not here to be a overall overbearing push on that. We have just brought a group of people together that have been in the industry for a very long time, identified a clear need, and wanted to save the industry billions of dollars in this process by creating a structure. That's what we're here for. We're not here to replace systems in a utility. We're just here to be able to find the functional structure way to make this all work together for the greater good. So, the thought process around this, your decision about how you view this is your choice, and we're not here to try to influence that. We're simply saying we're here to help. We want to help. We built a system that we believe can help based on a very broad perspective from things that have happened around the world, and we're making it available. We have announced the registry in partnership with Esri, our GIS partner in this, that we do all of our display in very high-end mapping displays that give people a lot of capabilities to turn on different layers and view data in different ways, again, based on their role-based security. We're doing some final testing here in November and December before we officially roll the product out in January. As we have expressed to many of you that we have talked to, we would offer to provide the data collection and management aspect of this and approval process for free for the ADR pilot to be one of our core final beta testers and to get significant and great input from you about how the system could be better. So that is basically the offer that we have to say we would love for you to use this in the ADR pilot as a test to be able to get feedback from a broader set of constituents that we've already talked to. When we do roll this out in January, everyone should be aware that the data collection aspect of this, as we have talked to different groups around the country, there are a whole bunch of utilities that don't have the money wherewithal capability to have an electronic DER data collection process. And so we were asked by several jurisdictions if we'd be willing to provide that aspect for free for all utilities, just so that they could have electronic data collection. If they didn't become a member of the registry, they don't vote, they don't get to improve the system, and they also don't get the APIs and data transfer and mapping tools and everything else, but at least they have, in conjunction with their interconnection process, Appendix A of their interconnection agreement that collects all of the electronic data electronically, and the system manages it. And we will be offering that as a service for all U.S. and territorial utilities when we roll this out, to help with the electronic data management of this information immediately while they consider joining the registry if that's the right thing for them to do. So thank you all for your time. We always, in each presentation, want to thank the immense number of people around the world and in the different organizations that we've talked about throughout this call that have selflessly and tirelessly given us support and aid to get this thing done, to be able to serve our industry. And thank you for your time today as we've had the discussion. I do encourage you, there's a wonderful ESIG report about creating a national initiative and the imperative on that for DER integration, and the fact that this is a baseline thing that we all are going to have to deal with, and we need to find a collaborative way to do that. So I'm going to stop there with my rapid fire WebEx presentation here and open it up for questions.
I see Martha has her hand up.
Thanks, Jason. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good morning. It's Martha Henson from Encore. I was wondering if you could go back to slide 12. I had a question on one of the bullet points there. Yeah. So the last bullet point on this slide says ERCOT has budgeted to create a registry system next year. I was wondering if you could elaborate on what tool or initiative that's referring to specifically.
I cannot. I was just in a conversation with ERCOT a month ago, and they said, well, this is timely because we had a meeting yesterday and we put a line item in the budget to do this. So that's the amount of information that I have on that. Any specifics would need to come from ERCOT.
And just real quick, Martha, this is Dave Maggio with ERCOT. I guess I'm actually going to be meeting with Chris to talk a little bit more about the idea. I think we definitely see value in the initiative and all that. I guess in terms of a budget item, I'm not aware of that, but I guess I can talk to some other staff at ERCOT that would have been involved in those conversations to see what we have. But at this time, I'm not aware of like a set project or anything like that we have underway, but we can explore that a little bit further, and I can try and share what I learned with the group.
Hey,
Thanks
Dave,
for the clarification, Dave.
Dave, that was Joel Kepke and Woody on that side.
Got it. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you both.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Chris? And Chris, if you could just shoot me a copy of the deck.
I will
get
do
a
so.
Copy of that to everybody. Perfect. Any other questions though for Chris?
Well, that was easy.
And then I guess
if there are,
since it's a relatively new topic, I'll also ask if anybody wants to have. We'll have some time as a task force to discuss this further. But Chris, I appreciate you taking the time to put the deck together and to provide some background for us so we know a little bit better what this is and what it's not. And so I appreciate you walking us through that. For the task force members and any other members of the public tuning in, I'll remind you that we have a good number of additional workshops this week on Thursday and Friday. So take a look at the interchange under Project 53911 to get more details on that if you don't already have them. I appreciate everybody joining today. We'll wrap it a few minutes early.
Thank you all very much. Look forward to talking to you.